Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe. Here's your host, Sloan Patton.
Welcome to the program. I'm Sloan Patton. On our show today, we'll be talking with Lee Cotter. He's the newly elected Republican Senator for District 36 in Doña Ana County. He joins us from Santa Fe, where the legislative session has already begun. Good morning, Mr. Cotter. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Sloan. I'm doing great, with the exception of the 10 degrees that we had this morning.
I believe it is quite cold up there. So you've just made your way up there. Have you found your office, found your desk up there yet?
You know, I found my office yesterday morning, and of course I've worked up here before, so it was no problem at all.
Well, great. Well, let's begin with talking about your election. This was the first time you ran against Mary Jane Garcia, or the third time rather, that you ran against Mary Jane Garcia. Did you win this election, or did she lose it?
Well, I think every election's about the same. They both do both of those. You either win or lose.
Okay. You said voter ID was your number one priority recently. Is that still true?
Oh, it continues to be true. There are 3 or 4 issues that I care a lot about. Voter ID is one where we really need to identify that we for sure have honest elections. Whether we're going to get that, you never can tell. In the Senate, it takes 22 votes to prevail.
Why is that so important to you?
Well, we've spent most of my life looking at other countries and their debates over whether they were honest or not. I've watched in my young years. I watched Russia have elections, or Soviet Union have elections, I guess back then, and it was always ridiculed. And then we would go to a variety of countries around the globe, and they would be talking about whether they were honest or not. And when we can permit dishonesty, which we recently we watched in Sunland Park, so it's clear it's occurring. When we permit dishonesty, our form of government is kind of suspect. So I think it should be above reproach, and the only way to do that is to have honest people running elections and to have voter ID. So only people who actually are themselves can vote for themselves.
Now, some people might say that it's wasting time because we might just keep going back and forth on this issue. Do you think that that's true?
I can't imagine that honesty is a waste of time.
Okay.
If we've gone so far that honesty is a waste of time, then, man, we've got a long way to go.
Just for the viewers, could you explain a little bit about what the specific problems were at Sunland Park?
Well, Sunland Park had a couple of things. They encouraged, understand, I didn't investigate, I wasn't there, so I'm reading the newspaper. So if the newspaper's honest, then that's what I can relate. But they had people who didn't live in Sunland Park register to vote, and they had a whole variety of people that registered to vote at a particular residence. So both of those are issues. Then they had purportedly people voted for other, people voting more than once under names of either non-voters or deceased voters. And they're in the process of prosecuting, so we'll get to see what the actual charges are over time. But in general, if we allow any headline to say there's a problem, when I first ran for office, I mailed fundraiser letters out to people who voted in the last 2 elections. And I was surprised to find that one of my really close friends' grandfather got one of my letters, and I said, great, he voted. That's good. I didn't see any money from him. He says, well, you're not going to. He died in the 70s. Well, that's a problem for me. And yes, I've watched many people that I know that died, and I did physically check the rolls, and they did remove them from the voter rolls. However, all this process leads to one simple solution. If you produce an ID or something that the state produces that they are confident that you are who you say you are, then we will, by definition, have honest elections.
And just to make it clear, under the law, if it's reinstated, would someone who doesn't have a proper ID be turned away at the polls?
Well, in general, they won't. Most laws that I've read around the country, as well as the one that I read years ago in New Mexico, allowed for other forms of ID. It required that the state issue an ID for free to anyone that walked in ahead of time and produced the documentation that they needed. So that was one way around it, and they were talking about doing it for free. So it was only a matter of effort rather than money. And then they went through with things like, okay, bring us a utility bill with your name and your address on it that will now verify it. So they had a lot of ways to make it simple. And of course, even at that, if you couldn't produce any of those things, they gave you a provisional ballot, and then would later, after the election, go back and see, okay, that signature does in fact look similar to the one on the registration card, so this was an okay voter. Or vice versa, if the signature was nowhere close, then they didn't count it. So we have a lot of backup systems to ensure everybody gets to vote, but we just don't want to, apparently.
Just this week, the governor has issued her State of the State, and she emphasized education specifically. I know that you and I have talked about education and some of your views on that. What are your specific plans for improving education in your district? Well,
I would like to see every child be able to read. And I know several teachers who've talked about people in their classrooms in high school that can't read.
Why do you think that's so?
Why is it so? Nobody cared. The student didn't try. The parent didn't care. The teachers, year after year, couldn't do anything about it. Maybe recognize that we only teach reading for the first few years, and after that, we're into mathematics or social studies or science or some other class. And is that teacher supposed to take their time away from science to teach reading for the 1 or 3 or 4 students in their classroom that can't read? Well, that puts the teachers under a lot of pressure.
Right. Would you be changing laws to make sure that students don't pass to the next grade if they can't read?
I don't think we should have social promotion ever. I think we should have a legitimate grading system. Whether we're talking reading or we're just talking general proficiency in 4th, 8th, or 11th grades, we don't need standardized tests if we give grades that match the performance on those tests.
So you're saying
when we listen to them talk about all these things, it comes down to, can they read? Do they get a grade in their classroom that is commensurate with their standardized testing? And if they do, then we don't need a standardized test. Everything's fine.
And so you're saying that a student wouldn't be able to go on to the next grade until they're able to read, so that teachers in 9th or 10th grade aren't still working with students to learn to work on reading at that point. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think that if you can't read at 3rd grade, you can't be in 4th grade. And if we won't have this happen, but they've commented in the opposition that every grade no one will get by 3rd grade. Well, if you realize that there is a legitimate standard for 3rd grade, you have to be able to read this well. if every parent knows, every teacher knows, every student knows, then we won't have a problem.
And what program do you want to see the money? Where do you want to see the money go specifically for the programs there? Are there certain programs that you would allocate money to?
Well, the details are less important than the exceptions. I think every child in America can learn how to read. I've met people who live outside of Columbus, and they send their children to Columbus to learn to read at night because they who live in Mexico believe it is so important for their children to learn to read in English.
Sure, those are parents
and I
that,
cannot
that every
believe
child, I'm
that,
sure, wish that they have. I mean, it is all about the parents that care. What about dealing with families where the parent is not there all the time for the child? Are there any programs that you'd want to introduce, after-school programs or summer programs?
I really haven't considered it. Most, I'm not an educator. Yes, I spent a lot of time in education as a student, but I've never taught anyone. But when we come up with a variety of excuses to allow them to go to the next grade, I'm opposed to that. Now, as far as the detailed programs, we started years ago when I was young. We had something they called Head Start, and based on the statistics that I read many years ago, we went from helping them as five-year-olds to being the same as everybody else as 8-year-olds. So I'm not sure that even the program of old that called Head Start was successful, but it really doesn't come down to the details. In what program are you going to institute? It comes down to, are we going to require a standard? And up to now, we haven't chosen to. And the governor yesterday said that 88% of the people who drop out of school can't read at 3rd grade. So what's the point? So they're going to drop out in 9th grade or 10th grade or 11th grade. If all we have is 3rd grade and we never have a 4th grade teacher, every 4th grade teacher becomes a 3rd grade teacher, well, after a while they'll figure out that sure enough we're serious.
Right.
And no, I don't think that'll really happen. I truly do not.
And so you don't have the specifics yet on which programs, but you do still see that as a big priority for you going forward in the session.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, so moving on, you used cumbersome and onerous to describe some of the laws that are in effect. What are some of those laws specifically that you hope to change or amend while you're in session?
Well, I'm really into repealing. So what I watched a friend of mine start a business. Very small. It's still small. It likely stays small. But one of the things I discovered that he had to file his gross receipts tax paperwork, which of course start out many months of zeros, but he had to file it only online. So not only did he have to learn how to sell his product, find customers, but he had to master the internet. And then when he actually had a sale, so he had to fill out the forms, he was obligated to only make a wire transfer, which was inconvenient for him because the bank that he worked at the time told him they couldn't do it. Now, I'm not sure if that was true or not, but he wasn't permitted to send a check. So we're talking about things that are inconvenient. And those are the kinds of things we need to change. I watch lots of things that I question in my life, but they're not all with the state. Some of those are with the city. Some of those with just regulations. So some of that becomes administrative in the executive branch.
Sure. Are there any specific laws that you see yourself repealing for Doña Ana County, working to repeal?
I really haven't. The beginning. I spent a lot of time at the very beginning after I was elected, trying to come up with why we do or don't need continuing education requirements, and for whatever subject. I know that realtors are obligated to do a number of hours a year or so. I'm not a realtor, so I don't know the details.
Sure.
But those kinds of things that are impediments to accomplishing business. We spend money, we spend time, we don't earn money. We're that much closer to not doing business at all. Those are the kinds of things that we need to change, as well as basic things like tax reform. What we do now is we discourage working through taxation. We really ought to encourage working. We right now the unemployment system pays for some large number of weeks that seems like a method to ensure that people don't want to work or don't work really hard to find a job. When I first started my own business really long time ago, I had a gentleman who thought we were slowing down. I didn't have enough work for him, and he asked if he could be laid off first because he'd really like to take a vacation on unemployment. And I told him, no, we've got another job coming up. You just don't know. We're pouring the slab right now, because I was in construction at the time. And 2 weeks later, he quit because he truly did want to go somewhere. But are we encouraging work? Are we encouraging success or not? Those are the kinds of things that I want to go for.
When he quit, was he quitting to file for unemployment or just to go to another job?
I don't think he had another job, but I didn't ask. And if you quit, based on my understanding of the rules, you're not eligible for unemployment.
That's correct. So going back to the continuing education, you did mean that for mainly like professional or business people. That wouldn't apply to teachers, or would it? Do you want to see limits on continuing education for teachers as well?
Well, I don't know that I approve in general. It's a blanket statement, so that's difficult. But I don't really approve in general of mandated continuing education because you've already accomplished your degrees. You're mastering your work. Your job is on your own volition to keep up with what you need to know. When they would change materials in construction, I would go through and say, well, I'm going to try that. I'm not going to try something else. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to read. Well, in my eyes, all professions can do that. And I don't see where government has a place in requiring an individual to do certain hours. When I was working for other people, they had this program where they wanted me to go to schools to teach me something. And in general, I didn't learn very much. I had one school that I liked, so there are the exceptions, but most of my efforts were of waste. And so for my company to want me to do that was their prerogative. Mm-hmm. For my government to require they do it, see, I'm really down with freedom. Mm-hmm. For me, every time we pass a law, we take away someone's freedom.
Now, talking a little bit about your education, what I understand that you studied civil engineering at NMSU.
I did.
Right, and that was what led you into construction, I assume. It
was kind of the other way around, but that's fine.
Okay. Well, so with that background, what needs to be done with water in our region here?
Water is I think the largest issue. Yeah, I've got 4 or 5 things written down here that I've been talking about for months. Mm-hmm. But water is a really big topic. We don't have enough. I've lived in New Mexico a long time. I graduated from Las Cruces High as well. And when I was in high school, when I would go to the lake, it would be empty. Yes, it's Elephant Butte Lake for the uninformed in Las Cruces, but it was empty. However, 10 years later, maybe a little longer than that, we had water going over the spillway. So we have been in a cycle of more and less water all the time. However, based on the desert we see around our homes, we live in a desert. So in order for us to have enough water, we're going to have to conserve. I don't think that will be enough. We have to favor certain groups over others, and I personally hope that we favor farmers, because they make a quality of life in Las Cruces that we cherish. But we also have to have more water. So one of my jobs in my life has been, I was a pipeline engineer, and I designed and had other people install pipelines across a variety of states. So what I approve of, and yes, it's a long shot, and I've been talking about it for many years, is to lay a pipe to somewhere that they have abundant water at least some of the time.
Now, would you be willing to do that if it required residents of the city or the county to raise taxes slightly or pay more for their water?
I think that we're going to have, for the most part, no choice. But we've been raising those fees for a long time, 10 or 15 or longer years, and we haven't done anything that is really earth-shattering like move water into the lakes.
Right.
So is it going to be expensive? Oh, of course. Do we have to choose? You know, we just made a choice a little while ago to go to build a spaceport, which I approve of. You know, I didn't get to vote. I hadn't been elected yet, but we were successful in building a runway and a fence and a building and a variety of infrastructure, but we were able to build a runway. And we've subsequently, I think, extended it some, and I hope we extend it more. But those are the kinds of investments that we've made in an effort to develop our landscape, our society. And the same thing's going to go for water. Mother Nature doesn't provide us with enough water consistently over time. And so what do? We don't have enough electricity in Las Cruces. We put up a power line and we bring it in from Phoenix or Four Corners or wherever it comes from. We can do the same thing with a pipe.
What about the roadways?
Right now we crisscross. Repeat that, please.
How about the roadways in Las Cruces in Doña Ana County? Do they need improving?
Do we need improved roads? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It is one of the unique situations like this pipeline that is in fact in the purview of government. I don't know whether we're required to do lots of things that we actually spend money on. However, infrastructure, whether it's a spaceport, whether it's interstate highways, whether it's Picacho Avenue, all of those roads we need to improve. And in Doña Ana we need a road that goes from the interstate to Valley Drive. Are we going to be successful? Certainly not in 1 year. Are we going to be successful over time? I hope so. One of the things the federal government should have done with their stimulus program, instead of giving money to each state and letting them spend it on what they felt was necessary, as New Mexico did a few years ago, I would have been in favor of having them build a third lane or another lane on every interstate highway across the country. Yes, we built one from Texas to Las Cruces on I-10, which I approve of. We're changing the interchange on I-10 and I-25 as we speak right now, and I can't imagine in the last week we finished it. But those are the kinds of things that government's function is in fact designed for, because no individual can build their own roads for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that the spaceport and all the money, the millions of dollars that have been put into it, does that take away at all from money that could be going towards roads that people drive on every day?
I know for sure, based on reading the bill, that it did not. However, when we built a train up north, it did come from highway funds. So we can debate which investment was better or worse, and I'm not sure. I haven't ridden the train yet, so I'm going to hold my opinion on the train. But all of those things we get to prioritize. One of the interesting things in state government is that is what we do. You know, in a few weeks or months, I will cast a vote on the budget. The budget is a prioritizing between what we should or should not spend money on.
Right.
And we're going to spend money on highways as we always have, and we'll spend money on other things.
When you do vote on the budget, what are some make it or break it deals for you, whether you'll approve it or not?
You know, make it or break it. You know, that's you have to take a bill in its entirety. So when you walk up and you say, are you in favor of A or B? I'm going to say right after that, it depends on what it says. Because the short title could say it does A, and way down inside it does C and D, and I don't approve of that.
Right.
So
the
so
devil's
it really
certainly
comes
going to be
down
in the details. That's for sure.
You know, it's always the case.
It is, and the budget's something that we'll be following as it is presented to us. Just simply before we go, a yes or no question. I think I know what your answer will be, but will you be voting for the informed consent law for the spaceport?
Anytime I get a chance to vote for informed consent, I will.
Yes.
And
okay.
of course, informed consent, yes.
All right, that's what I thought. Well,
I don't expect to get to vote on it on the Senate floor.
That does just about wrap up our time for today. I wish we could talk more. Lee Cotter, thank you so much for joining us. We definitely appreciate your time. And thank you for joining us for Your Legislators. We'll see you again next week.